So, thank you for coming.
So much for coming.
I'm Catherine Bertola, and this is Miranda Whall, whose work we are sitting amongst in the exhibition When Earth Speaks, which hopefully you've had time to look at and watch and listen. So Miranda sort of invited me just to have a conversation really about the work. So I'm not really interviewing Miranda, we're just going to have a kind of chat really. And I think so Miranda and I have known each other for probably 20 years or something. And Miranda used to live in the northeast, and we met a long time ago, and I think we connected through lots of similarities, I suppose, maybe within our work at that time. We both do lots of work around lace and making drawings, and I think that we kind of just, really connected in that way. So this is the kind of conversation that's just going to kind of perhaps reflect not just on the work that's in the exhibition, but also like maybe bringing in some of thinking about like those kind of ongoing themes that have kind of been present in your work for the last 20, 30 years.
We could probably thank Vane for our meeting too, can't we? Because that was the early days of Vane. We were here around, it's about 25 years. Well, you were doing stuff with Vane before I got here, weren't you? And then I think we probably met at various events as well. But yeah, part of a community. I thought it was a really welcoming community. I'd come from London, and it was really nice to be in a smaller regional community. That was very striking for me at the time.
So, it's just in terms of where to start the conversation, right? I just wonder whether you could just talk a little bit about this project. I feel like we're sitting in a body of work that's kind of a project. So could you just sort of talk a little bit about the origins of the project and what you were thinking about and trying to explore?
Yeah, so about 2.5 years ago, so I teach at Aberystwyth University, and about 2.5 years ago, I was invited into a side project, or a project that was around, it was in an area called Pwll Byron in the Uplands in Wales, and it was a part of the university that I'd worked with before, where I did this 5.5 mile crawl through this landscape. So I knew this landscape intimately, and they were installing these sensor networks. The idea was just to install 3 over different heights of this landscape, but as it stands, there's still just 1 installed, and they brought in me as the artist to kind of make visible the invisible. That was the brief, that was the title. And I got this idea for the Soil Voices piece really quickly, the one that's on the wall behind here, where I dug a ditch, the length of me, the width of me-ish, and I wanted to be in that ditch for 24 hours, picking up the data that was coming off these soil sensors. And a colleague had transferred the data into voice, so I had a voice, an American military male voice coming through the headphones with this data. So the idea very quickly came that I wanted to lay in this ditch, have the voice, and recite the voice over 24 hours. And that it would be live streamed on social media, so there was a kind of relational element to it, so that it was wherever you are, the audience can kind of keep dropping into where I am. The idea that you could be then invited to be with the soil and its fluctuating conditions. The sensors were picking up temperature and moisture every 15 minutes. And I was getting the numbers quite erratically. Well, they're not once you know what the rhythm is, but it seemed quite erratic. Anyway, all this technology was set up, and then the USB broke at 4 in the morning, so I had to abort the project at 4 in the morning. But it was an amazing experience, and that was what I did for that first initial project. Oh, and I should say subsequent to that, so a year before that, I was all ready to go with it, and then the Queen died the night before I was meant to do it. And the uni sent out a memo saying, everybody stop doing what they're doing, nothing public should happen. And I phoned comms in the morning and said, please, I'm completely ready to do this thing. And I said, I mistakenly said, it looked a bit like a grave and I looked a bit dead. I said, no way. So I couldn't, so I had to wait another whole year to be able to do it.
Why did you have to wait a year?
Because the weather turned, September, the weather turned to, the weather's so different up there that it was impossible to kind of be up there, really. So I waited a year. So in the meantime, I was invited into this other interdisciplinary project with academics from politics and science and film, and that was called Multi-Species Politics in Action. And actually it was her, Dr. Professor Amelia McKirky, that gave me the When Earth Speaks title, because she put us into categories like When Earth Speaks, When Plants Speak, When AI Speaks, and so on. And that's when I started the drawings, and so I did these first little drawings. And I was kind of really enchanted by them because the little collection of numbers struck me immediately that they looked like dirt, that they looked like earth, and that if you kind of blew them, the soil would fly away. And so I kind of felt committed to working out where that idea could go. And then I started doing it performatively. So I started this one sitting in the Arts Centre. I'd staged it over 4 days in the public areas of the Arts Centre. And so I had the drawing board and a table and the data printed out on piles of paper. And I thought that people would be quite engaged with that as a performance, but I was almost totally ignored. And it was really painful. And then I thought, gosh, this is how the earth must feel. I suddenly started empathising with the earth and soil. So then I started to think, so who could I make listen? Who could listen? Who could I find that might listen, or what could I find that might listen? So then I did one in a tropical house, a botany house, and the plants were much more attentive and empathic. And then I sort of ditched that idea and started work. And then a friend messaged to say she'd been converting the numbers to notes on the harp. And I thought, that's really beautiful. So then we did a performance together where I wrote the numbers, spoke the numbers, and she played it on the harp. And then that led to musical groups, and then that led to the ensemble that I've just done in the theatre. So yeah, it's been a really interesting sort of 2.5 year journey. And so we're definitely sitting in a project. And that really struck me after I put it up, that it's a project rather than a piece of work. Yeah.
And do you think it's finished?
I mean, I can access this data all the time. I'm worried that I'll never finish. I mean, I'm always feeling like I've got to stop because I can feel that I will keep returning to this data. But I'm doing a seed project next where we did a metabolomic fingerprint analysis of a black oat seed, and I've got this vast data set to work with from that.
And do you explain what?
It's a laboratory process where they put the seed in through various crushing, bashing, pulverising processes, and then they extract the data from it. I can't really tell you anymore. It goes in a machine that buzzes and loads of wires come out of it. All this data stream comes out of it. So we're doing a CD ensemble with a different group of musicians in September. So I'm moving to the seed, and then I'd like to do a slippery ensemble with a glacier. That's my next idea. So I might move away from this sensor network, but I'm definitely sticking with data for a while longer because I'm on a roll.
But what I found quite interesting about data is that the idea of data feels quite boring, a little bit dry. It's just like, and also quite difficult to make sense of if you don't know how to decode it or to interpret it or how to read it. It feels very, I don't know, it feels quite, like I feel quite detached from this in some way. So it's quite interesting that you're really drawn to it as a kind of, not material, but a subject. It is a material. And then how you translate that data through various ways. I think like the way you talk about your work is kind of very performative, or it's activating it in some way, it's sort of translating it. Do you feel like that's what your role is in that using that sort of data to try and, are you trying to speak for the earth and trying to give something a voice, or like, how do you feel in relation to that?
Yeah, so much to say there. I mean, yeah, definitely first of all, I was struck by the idea of giving voice, because it is its voice. It is one way we've got to access its condition. It's telling us its condition through the technology that we've got to do that. So we're receiving information about how it is, and I find that quite profound in itself.
Do you feel quite close to it? Do you feel like you have a relationship with it? I mean, that's something quite intimate about you seeing that film around the corner where you're literally lying in the kind of earth that's surrounding you and enveloping you, and you're kind of really connected, like physically connected to it, but also I guess it's quite emotionally connected to it. Do you feel like you have a kind of like empathy, or like?
I think the work I've been making over the last years is all about trying to get in, get down, get in, get with, like coming from the Nan Shepherd idea of going in, and when you go in, you're sort of immersed in it and with the mountain and with the thing. And drawing all the data and being with it over months. So these are all a month each of data. They all take me about a month to do. They are a month's worth of data. And all these pinpricks, like 103,000 something pinpricks. And so it's all made over lots of time. And the time that I'm doing it, I'm with the soil. I'm thinking about the soil. I'm connecting with it and giving it time, giving it my time, on the basis that our time is the most important thing we've got, the most valuable thing we've got. So if I'm giving it time, then I'm giving it value. So that's really a kind of central part of it. And yes, although I'm not obviously embodied, I am embodied, because like lace making, you are pouring over it. And I was thinking about how when the breath of the women that used to make lace used to discolour the silk, these are all kind of, they've come through my breath and my body. So yeah, but there's the dichotomy is that they're really detached. So I'm really playing with that. That is exactly the essence of what I'm playing with, and it's commenting on the fact that, however much we try to embody, we try to get close, we try to represent, we still can't. We can't get close. Data is a way of getting close. Camping out is a way of getting, whatever you do, but we can't. So it's about the disconnect. So I'm playing with that sort of connect-disconnect really at the heart of it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I think it does, because when I came to see the work, I was quite interested in the idea of like the work was a sort of stillness, like the space feels, well, not when the sounds on it's like activated, but it feels like quite a still show, quite a full show, that the work feels quite controlled in some way, like you're going up, like you use the circle and the sphere, and yeah, it's also really not still. When you look at it, it's very and there's lots of detail in there, and it sort of reminds me of like when you look at soil, like I kind of think it's quite interesting visual relationship between these drawings and the soil on the plinth. That is, you look at the soil, it's these layers and layers and layers, a kind of matter that are kind of bound together, and it's kind of like these drawings feel like a slice of soil in some way. There's kind of like visual connections, but there's this really interesting thing between something that's very still and something that's very active, and how you, I don't know whether that...
It's to do with the visible and invisible again, isn't it? I mean, we're told that a teaspoon's worth of soil has more microorganisms than there are people on the earth, which is mind-boggling, isn't it? So we kind of conceptually go to that, but that's impossible to grasp, really. And so, yeah, I think of these as like, they're impenetrable, but each number holds a piece of information. So it's similar in that they're made up of the units that make sense, or don't make sense to the average person. They make sense to the scientist, the analyst, but they don't make sense to us, and it's the same with the soil. We can't make sense of it, but so it's that again, it's another play on I don't know where I went there. another kind of dichotomy, that's the right word.
I think there's something quite interesting as well as about that sort of where you started with this project was you lying in the earth in your grave-like trench that you'd dug out, and then how like what it's become that is like pulling in all these different people, and that collaboration feels like it is quite central to the work you've ended up producing, and there's like music, and you're kind of bringing lots of different other artists, other people into like the work. Like, does that feel like a shift for you? Like, I think I've always felt, I know you've always like with the piece you was crawling, you worked with like people who documented, but it was a very solitary act, whereas this work seems to be kind of bringing others to help to work with you.
Well, when I made Passage, when I went around the world on those residencies, making a video audio installation, when it was constantly work drawing in other like creatives and non-creatives and making this big collage of sound and video from around Mexico and Thailand and various places. So that was totally collaborative. And then Cross Paths Sheep, I brought in 8 musicians to each make a composition for each of the 8 crawls. So actually it's become quite common for me to do that. But I haven't collaborated in the way that I have. Like I was commissioning, but this was collaboration, so that's very different, isn't it? But yeah, I really like this year that I've set up this way of working where I'm solitary in the studio, and it is, like you say, very controlled and quite, contained and quite, intimate. Very intimate. And then I'm on stage and I'm allowing for like everything and anything to happen to a certain point. I really feel excited about these two sort of areas. And the exhibition, as opposed to the theatre, so the whiteness and the spaciousness of this and the quietness and the calmness of it compared to the black stage, which is just full of emergent, dynamic energy. So I'm really excited about carrying on in those two spaces. And I think it actually suits me as a person. There's those two sides to me, and I feel actually like, I finally sort of found those two.
It's a little bit like this kind of like beneath the ground and above the ground kind of way of working, kind of like the sort of when you're like the film feels like very possibly it's quite dark, and I think the head torches make me think of like mining and those kind of references to being underground and in the soil, and then the other work feels like it's much more light, it's much more light and tone.
It's a nice reading, definitely, of these two, but the seed one's going to be very white and lamp-like, so that won't fall into the same need. But yeah, definitely here. But I think of these, just going back to that, I think of them as like data, like that. I think what I'd love to talk about, especially why I chose you to talk to, because I think we both share a material, a real interest in materiality, and I see these as like analogue data storage. You know, they're all. I've made the information impenetrable, inaccessible, as it is for most non-scientists anyway. But I'm trying to play with it materially. So I see them as like clouds or mist, and then this one especially like took out the ink. So just to explain these, so this is like a week's worth of data from March, 1st to 7th of March, and I extracted all the decimal points, all the zeros, and then everything else, and then the ink that it took to, in theory, approximately to draw them. And so that was like a little narrative that I was, and then I went to this and thought I'll take the ink out altogether, and then pin pricks for every number. And I want to eventually do like a month's worth, so it will be almost back to lace where it's hardly anything. So it's going back to the soil really, it's going back to the materiality of the soil. So I'm drawing a big circle from soil through the numbers, through the ink, through the paper, back to material. That's the way I see it. So I don't think we think of data as material, but I think that's been a big mistake because we've got these vast warehouses around the world that are using up all the resources, the local resources, to keep hold of this, to keep sustaining this data, to keep the rooms cool. And I think the thing that it was called a cloud is one of the kind of biggest problems with the way that we perceive data, that actually it's not a cloud, that it's very material, very real, and it's very carbon costly. So yeah, I feel like I'm kind of making parallels and drawing circles.
So you're making very specific choices, like it was interesting that I did carbon, like the data being collected, so it's carbon and ink, and is that very intentional choice?
Yes, it was, and I did have a carbon rectangle on the floor that was the same dimensions as the ditch, and that was my way of going full circle, back to the ink, back to the ditch, back to the ground, but I went home and realised that the ink didn't feel quite right in this context, but I want to carry on down that line because, we are looking at carbon. Rotring pens wouldn't tell me exactly what was in their ink, but it is mostly lamp black carbon, which I found really fascinating. So it's an extraction and a translation of everything I'm trying to pick apart.
I'm just wondering, does anybody have any thoughts or questions for Miranda at this point?
Loads of questions. How do you manage the link between performance art, and public art? And have you always been involved with performance art, or was it something that evolved through your time?
I think I've always had an element of performance. I've very rarely performed for the public. I've had whole bodies of work where I performed for the camera. But I've often found a use for performance in the work. Yeah, it's like a tool, I think, just an additional tool rather than it for itself. I don't know if I've done public art. Do you see public art in this? I don't.
No,
I don't think I've gone into public art. No, I've gone into relational. I've worked with people, but I've made it.
You did the crawling performances you did.
Well, right on the street, you're right. Right,
yes. So public, I mean, temporary and transient, and not like permanent, but
completely public.
But I think that's like, they were really public. I mean, not public art in the kind of traditional sense that they're like there forever.
Yeah.
But, you know.
And one more thing I might add. When I first walked in, I thought, wow, this is fantastic. And it is really fantastic stuff. Just the way it's laid out. And you have helped a fantastic amount by the sunshine.
Yes, it's very gorgeous in here, isn't it?
Yeah.
And lovely little accidents happen where the photographer on the night of the show was picking up people's reflection in these. And I saw the photo and I thought, that kind of says it all, the portrait of the person in the mist, in the cloud. I don't know, because one thing I forgot to mention is, I think what is central to this is the triad between human, data and earth. And it really is that triad that I'm interested in. How do we relate? We're all interacting, we're all affected by each of those things. Data massively affects our lives. We're massively affecting the landscape, the earth is massively affected, so we're all tied up. And I think that's what I forgot to say is central to this. Yeah. And that's where the performance maybe comes in, because it brings that human. So at the opening night I lay down here still for an hour, because I wanted the human presence. But the human presence is in the drawings, I hope, in the labour and in the time that it takes to make them. So yeah, have I answered?
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me I've done public art. I think I was thinking of sculpture.
Yeah, I think because that's what public art is. Public art can be many things. I think it does bring me to thinking about like that idea of transience.
Yes.
Actually, which we saw when we were chatting before came, that was the sort of the kind of, I suppose, the transient nature of landscape itself, and then your kind of interaction with it when you're kind of lying in the earth, and then how you then and the transience maybe the drawings, you know, and these kind of gestures, and when you're talking about working into the point at which they might disintegrate, then it comes, it just goes back, you know, it goes back, sort of speaking to that idea.
I think you've articulated it really there, that if I keep drawing into it, then it's going to break away at the material, isn't it? And it's going to disintegrate back into the earth. Transience. I wonder if the transience is more the process of being with it than the things that remain. I mean, it's interesting to go back and forth from being with the data, like we do with the earth. We go back and forth to it, don't we? Or we don't go into it at all, or we remember it's there. So maybe it's our relationship that's transitory with it. My relationship with the data is transitory. I'm not sure that these have ended up transitory, but obviously they've got that light quality. They're almost like the ones at the back that you can hardly see.
But they could go on. It's like you could add to them. Like, I suppose what they are is like a snapshot of the moment in time, isn't it? It's like that's a week. It's kind of just refer to them as months or
time is very present. So these are months, this is a week, this is a week. The ones at the back come off the month. Yeah, so there's kind of time in it all. Yeah.
I'm wondering, a totally different direction. I'm originally from Estonia. Our folklore, we have enormous amount of different folklore, which is the under-earth. So we have characters who are under-earth characters. And I just wondered if you've ever thought of any kind of connections with the kind of folklore. I don't know so much about British folklore, and I know that we're quite unique having these under-earth kind of characters and the kind of sense how Earth is so present in really kind of in lots of cultures. And I think in the Western space, obviously, this connection has been lost. And I just wondered if you've ever sort of thought to connect that part to this sort of science, bodily experience, transience, what you're doing, to also, because there's so much knowledge in a sense of sensing the earth very differently through this kind of traditional.
I think that would be something very, very different, wouldn't it? But what you're saying reminds me that I think Donna Haraway talks about critters. I quite wanted to do data critters, creatures that emerge from the data, like weird little forms that kind of come out of these. I've been playing with black plasticine and trying to model with the ink, and so yeah, maybe kind of some.
Do you think that's maybe what the dancer's doing in the film?
And I was going to say, I think she feels like what you're talking about. She was very like connecting with something figurative.
Yeah, but it's kind of like, that's what I was saying when you're saying about the data things, that there is that element already there, and it would be quite, so, you know, there's already that thing you're trying to get something out of the earth in a sort of different way, and so it's kind of, for me, because for me the folklore is really important, so I kind of like obviously situate things to my knowledge, and so it's kind of interesting that kind
It's
of
an interesting. Yeah, it's not in my orbit, but yeah.
I think it is kind of interesting to go back to these really old knowledges and make these connections, because I think lots of times we forget that we actually have more knowledge about things in our really deep, sort of like we're using sensors and things like that. But I think connecting those things would be really interesting.
There's so many artists working in this area at the moment that it feels really exciting that we're all coming in from different positions, and this is you know mine, and I think it hovers in a different space.
But it is a kind of ritual already, you know. It's a kind of ritual. What you
there is that's great to bring that to it. Yeah, there's definitely ritual in it. Yeah, it's definitely ritual. Yeah, and I think my work's always have ritual in a kind of roundabout way. Yeah. Yeah.
Pick up on that. I think, first of all, it's what you've talked about already is really rich in terms of helping to sort of think about how this all has come together. So thank you. And one of the things that you said laterally about the triad of human and data and the earth, and the kind of how abstract the data is, I think is, and that you're playing with that, I think it's really interesting, because when I saw you in Earth, you know, it could have gone so many directions.
Yes, exactly. There are so many directions.
And you could have been creating your own forms of data from all of the sensations you were making in that space, and then what you've done instead, you've taken this really quite absurd in some ways data that you've sat and listened to on headphones and then repeated, and there's something about that, you know, taking something which to some people, to the scientists present on that project, is absolutely hard evidence of something, and showing how absurd it can seem. And I just think you've done that so well, and I'm really interested to hear what maybe some of the scientists that you work with, and maybe even some of the other disciplines, how they responded to that. Because I've worked with scientists myself, but I don't know how.
I love that you brought the word absurd, because there's always been an absurd in my work. I think I am having a laugh here.
I meant it with
I love the absurd, and I'm definitely playing with the absurd and pushing things to edges is absurd, isn't it? I think this all resides at the edge, I think, of falling into something ridiculous. Nothing, you know, it's nothing and something edge, isn't it? But yeah, the scientists, I've left them. I left them a long time away ago. They didn't come with me on this journey, and they don't get it. Sadly they don't, and they don't kind of want to. But they're inviting me back into something else. So they clearly, you know, it's weird. Like, I was so struck by that last week to get an email about Pete, the Pete project. But they seem to, I don't want to generalise, and maybe there's scientists in the room, but it feels like they have the equation, don't they, of kind of process, like question, process, methodology, result, and then they end, and then the artist goes over that line and over the wall, and we go into the poetics and the philosophical and the aesthetic, and they just don't seem to be able to find the value in that place. I don't know.
They must to a degree, because they're asking to come back, so they must sort of see some.
I know that I think they got the circles more than they got because there's a kind of form. Okay, that sort of looks like something we recognise, and they literally can't see the point of that whatsoever. They just don't see what that's added up to at all. But it's been interesting in me maybe to answer, like, approaching this glaciologist. I realised that I just want the raw data. I don't need to go on their journey. I mean, their journey brings the narrative to it, but I don't need that. I don't need to go into that space, and they don't need to come into this space. And I think maybe that's where I've matured into, which is just realising we've both got our role and we both meet at a certain point, and then we say goodbye, and it's like the two.
It's kind of really interesting, because those SciArt collaborations, I've done lots of work with a historian, and it was like we weren't collaborating at all, but it was really interesting. Like we were kind of both looking at both used like domestic cookbooks in our research, and she was a food historian around the Victorian period, and she was also looking at the introduction of clocks into the domestic space, and I was kind of making work around labour, and so we were kind of like, our interest was really, really, really similar.
Yeah.
And we had these kind of crossovers, but actually when it came to it, it's like we just did our thing.
Yes.
And what was interesting was where those things kind of just, they didn't even really cross over, they just kind of rubbed against one another.
Rubbed against,
and like we're on the same road, and we
we're using the same resources,
but totally different approach.
And I think coming to terms with that is really healthy, because otherwise there's the whole thing of the artist is always parasitic on the back of the science. And because I said to these guys, like, why don't you put the sensors around my ditch? And they just said we'd be completely laughed at, because you can't.
Would corrupt the data.
It was just like the premise just wasn't the premise. The journal just wouldn't, the article wouldn't stand up in the journal, the premise was wrong.
And there's something beautiful about the way you've both spoken about that, though, the idea that different disciplines, with different approaches to exactly the same material, going in such different directions, it kind of makes a mockery of the idea of the unbiased, sort of perfect way of looking at it.
And this is why we need everyone.
And every way is valuable. It's just different, and I think that
everyone needs to be at the table in the crisis that we're in. We all need to be, and every artist with every perspective, it's pluralistic, isn't it? We all need to be there, saying our bit, our piece. Yeah.
I was interested in where you were talking about your relationship with the data. I was wondering how much, I suppose it's going back a little bit, like you were saying with folklore, whether the data ends up having a sort of, a character for you, whether there is that kind of emotional relationship, and what that is. Does the data represent a characterisation of the soil itself, or does it feel quite distinct to you?
Yeah, it doesn't apart from this idea of maybe these critters appearing from the drawing, but no, I haven't brought the figurative, this is very non-representational. It's very important that I'm coming at landscape from a non-representational perspective, because I've played with representation. We can talk about representation. How do you approach representation? I'm trying to avoid it, so that's why. No, there is no figuration. There is no character.
I don't know, because I felt like in the film.
Or maybe in the film.
But folklore is not always representation.
Okay.
That's also the thing to kind of think of it is something a bit much wider sort of knowledge. It's like, I think we're so used to looking at it like that, but the sort of I don't even know, maybe the words are not quite right what I'm using, but I kind of, personally, I do see quite a lot of creating folklore in what you're doing. So, and it's, but I think the artist role working with scientists is a role of a trickster, really, like what the Maharis is talking as well. So I think that's kind of, even so that they might not feel it's beneficial with the artist, but you're just a little bit sort of disturbing their everyday balance.
Agitation.
And it might just might trigger a different way into somewhere, the different ways of them making connections.
They say it has in their writing when they have to do a report or something. They say it really has.
Do you read the reports?
I was getting letters of support for a grant application, and they always say this completely changes the way that we work and think, but it's hard to see that on the ground, really.
So they elaborate on that and say how it's changed.
No, they don't say how it's changed. They just say it's a different perspective. A different perspective, a different way in, a different audience. That's okay, isn't it? That's all it needs to be.
I'm really enjoying the sort of long review. I'm just musing while you're chatting, because obviously, like, we've been working alongside you 20, God, how many years ago it was, and thinking about, I was thinking of your work, particularly you were really central in your work.
Me at the centre.
Yeah, and coming back to what the man in the front was saying, actually, that performative and the body and yourself, I think is a lot of what I think about when I think of your practice. So it's quite interesting seeing how that thread is still really strong. I feel like it's really strong when I think about you crawling with a tree on your back, and you talk about lying in the earth, and you talk about that. Like that, it's interesting when you said to Catherine about materiality, it's quite interesting. It's like, oh, that's interesting, because I think less about that when I think about your work, I think more about you as that sort of central figure in it. And even when you talked about sitting at the desk and then people not like ignoring you and feeling that felt like a very Miranda Whall moment to me, and that's sort of like almost like, I don't even really know what I'm saying. It's quite interesting, that idea, like you say, the data, but yourself being a really, really important material or person or presence or something within that. You know, that's not necessarily the case, is it, in every artist's work, but you there, and then the labour, say, I suppose it goes on here, doesn't it? So that time frame being really important, and the mark making being really important. That's a sort of inspiration. I'm not really making any point, but I'm just that sort of like long view of like, as though what we're making has changed a lot, or the subject, or whatever you're doing, that thread of you really being part of that is really
because I think what you've touched on, Kath, is so important, because I think it's about relationship. It's about relationship, and it's always been about relationship. So like in Malvern, when I was making those lace drawings, it was about relationship with mulches and lemon squeezers and ferrets and everything I could find I put myself with, and it was about, so what do you do in relation to me, and what am I able to do in relation to you? And it's always relational, and it's always about relationship.
It reminds me of like some of the earliest work I remember of yours, which you knew before I even met, I think, which was sitting on a tree reading.
Yes.
And the handstands, doing handstands in various locations, and that connection with you and that.
And you just reminded me of the cow one, which was really still significant, because I was reading my diaries of the cows, and they kept walking off. And I was like, June the 27th, I've had this breakthrough today, and they're like, God, I'm so excited about the relationship with the scientists. Maybe that's just how I'm feeling. Well, it is. I'm relating to the earth not being heard. That's what happened in the performance. I thought, we both aren't being heard.
Did you know when you were crawling? I know that's not. It's not related to it. Sorry, that's
No.
But did you feel ignored?
Oh, I got completely ignored.
Especially across the same, but they would be ignored in that context.
I was ignored in my family, that's where I was I've noticed that even the still life work back in the Royal Academy, and I was picking up on still life, it was about the objects being ignored. So I did Caravaggio's Supper at MES, and then I did the objects on the table, because they were ignored. And Zubran's pots were ignored. Like still life as a genre, in the hierarchy of painting, is the lowest. So I've always been attracted to the low, ignored, unnoticed. Sorry, that is actually the deepest thread in it all. Yeah. Yeah. Where did we go from there?
Thanks for listening. Does anyone else have any questions or comments, reflections on the work that you see?
I haven't, but it's not so much really this conversation so far and contributions from everybody, but I wondered whether we should start a campaign to rename the data centers and the cloud into the soil, because basically that's what you seem to suggest, that
Something heavy.
it's so carbon heavy, it's so rich, it's extracting the water to cool down all the data centers that, that are churning all this kind of constantly being exploded. But ultimately, everything is that they're drawing from the ground, from under the ground, as you mentioned, this underworld. They're certainly not the cloud. Although it's a beautiful representation of the cloud.
This one,
But it's the underworld that we have to pay attention to in the data.
And I think mist is appropriate in it, it's disguising disrupting our view.
Well, in fact, in folklore, mist is the point where, well, at least in the Irish folklore, they believe that if you cross this point, if it's misty and foggy, and if you cross, then you enter into the underworld. That's it, if you manage to do that. So, I would guess. And then ultimately, the folkloric kind of beliefs and the myths are almost a call to action to save the biodiversity. It's almost like, that's not, well, at least some scientists and non-scientists believe that, storytellers from her. It's almost like we worship this tree not for the almost this kind of primeval kind of force nature, but because if we don't worship it, it will be chopped off, and it will fail, and the biodiversity will go. But if you campaign for it only because it's an ancient tree and maybe you stand the chance not to have a motorway going through the tree and the orchard over the area. So there is a bit of a almost belief that this kind of storytelling needs to be revived to keep fighting for nature and for the soil and for the underworld. Because otherwise it's like
I quite like what you said there about kind of going to the other side. Like I think through labour, through meditative labour, you do begin to hit a wall that you could perhaps go over, and I've definitely done that in the crawling, like gone into something much more abject and beyond the human in a way. Just momentarily, and I think there is something about doing something so laborious and durational that you might get somewhere else. There is something quite spiritual there, isn't there? We're done 10 minutes. Is there anything else?
How was it for the Buto dancer and the other musicians? Did they reach this point?
Oh yeah, she completely did. So I just took her up to the hills with the cameraman and the film director, and they hardly had to kind of say anything. She was off in this, and that's why I chose Buta, and that's why I chose her, because I kind of knew she'd be able to do that. And yeah, she completely transcended, or as much as we can, transcended this world to another world. Yeah, that's exactly why I chose Buto, because that's what it's about in a way.
So would you say that your practice also kind of borrows a little bit of the tropes from the Buto dance? You know, because somehow, I don't know, in the film, I'm not entirely sure whether that's you or the Buto dances.
Oh, it's always the Buto dance.
Yeah.
Well, I did Buto 30 years ago, that's why I'm still attracted to it. And the things I was attracted to were the transitions between postures, positions, and looking in the interior and looking out. So the idea of the interior world. And that's what I'm meeting. I'm in my interior world when I'm meeting this data. Absolutely, so yeah. It's just not as obvious, it's not because they're still, and that's what you mean about the stillness, isn't it?
Yeah, they're still and they're not though, because I think when you can see it's interesting, the action in them, isn't it? You can see that's there, it's present, that action, whether it's the presence of the soil, the data, the presence of you actually drawing that same. It's very, it's there.
I've got a real frustration with, I want to know what the soil is saying through the data.
It's just saying it's very wet, or it's very dry, or it's very warm, or it's very cold, or it's in between it. I don't know because I haven't translated it from
No, I suppose that's quite interesting as well, because I'm left with uncertainty about
yes, and that's
why. I suppose that's quite interesting.
I did start by drawing all the 9s and all the 10s so that you could have seen some record. So you could have seen that October had lots of 9s and 10s and then April had lots of 3s and 4s.
Right.
I did play with that for a bit. I thought the scientists would be more interested in that.
So what shifted then? Why did you stop
I did shift there. I didn't like the shapes of them. I didn't like it aesthetically, visually. I didn't like the spikiness of those clustered drawings. I just wanted, I guess it looked too representational, just wanted to pile it all in and make it more impenetrable. I guess I don't really want to play the game of making it coherent.
Because that's what the scientists do.
Because that's what the scientists do, exactly. Yeah.
Is there a reference to the topsoil disappearing as well? Like in the final cycle goes and then it ends up with the holes in this material kind of.
I haven't, but it's a lovely contribution.
But at least that's what tends to be the scientific consensus that very, very soon we won't have any topsoil.
It's like 40 years or something, isn't it?
So it's also the way the minimalism goes through, it's like slightly larger, the fullness is there, and then it goes to the little dot and it disappears.
I think there's something, is the word nihilistic? There is something, for me, there's something really nihilistic about it, like it's quite dystopian. Do other people feel that? Is that obvious? I feel, especially the music, I don't know if you've heard the composition, but I feel that's quite dystopian.
It's like a requiem for the original.
And I said to all the collaborators, I threw lots of words and concepts at them, and I said, this is, let's scream, let's be really melancholy. This is not a happy situation. We need to touch the darkness of this. But I don't know if that's because these are so white and light.
I think the film is where that is where that's played out. I think.
Have you ever made any interactive pieces or aim to make it in the future?
Can you say anything now?
Sorry.
I really don't.
Have you ever made any interactive pieces, like immersive, and if so, in the future maybe, what would you
Immersive.
approach?
Well, I guess I did a video installation where I had 8 screens, and they were all edited to the music. It was of me crawling. Again, it was very abstract. It wasn't of me crawling, but it was of 16 GoPros I had on my body. So I was picking up all the, again, data, like visual data from the crawling. That was immersive, I suppose. I wanted people to be in that, on the ground with it.
Have you ever thought of maybe taking them to these places?
And I took people to it, and I got people crawling, and I've taken people to the ditch, and I've got them in the ditch. Yeah.
The theatre's quite immersive.
And the theatre was completely immersive, yeah, completely immersive. And the chapter one will be more immersive because people will be sitting around us rather than in the stacks, what they call it. So yeah, immersion's really important. And I started off in installation as a student. I've always been really wanting to get people into it.
That's quite interesting because that's what you said
that
you want to do. It's about getting in.
Yeah,
getting with it, getting in. It's that kind of bring the audience with you on that kind of.
I think it's when my dad was a lecturer, he had a fine art Coventry, and as a kid I always went to the degree shows, and it was always the rooms you could walk in, and the immersive installations were always the ones that excited me. So yes, I've always wanted, and I saw this room like this, I feel like I've worked with the room to kind of, it's not just about the pieces of work, but the feeling of the whole space.
We probably have time for one more question, if anyone has one.
Can you tell us something about the piece of work, please?
Which one? The three drawings? The turf.
Yeah.
Yeah, turf.
So that came from about that far away from the ditch.
Yeah.
So it came from up in the hills, and I just felt it deserved its presence.
Well, you're right, because quite often when you take something out of context, you start to realise what it is.
Yeah, it's that classic Duchampian framing device, isn't it? It's literally that. I grappled with it ethically, like should I take it from the earth? Will people find that problematic? Have I done something wrong by doing that? But it looks okay, and I'm going to take it back to its source. So I think it's okay what I've done, but I love that you could be in its volume and its materiality, and it was raised, it was given some status.
When you place it in the hall, say home again.
It's a what?
Home again.
Yes, home again.
But this is like a metaphorical ditch for it, because it's almost like, you know, it's the reverse to what you were experiencing in yours.
Yes.
So now, if you can imagine.
And it will go back and it will tell all the others what the experience was being in a white gallery. This will go back to its home and will tell to all of the under-earth creatures what it was to be in a white gallery.
And it can tell the story of how we sat around and talked about stuff that didn't mean anything or help anything.
It's desperate to tell us what it is and the work in it.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? It just sort of occurred to me that it's like everything's like looking at it, like how you were surrounded by it, but now everything you've done is surrounded by
I
it.
love that, you're right. I went and it's already displaced, isn't it? That's displaced. Yes, it's dying to get back to the juices of the earth.
It's like it could do with a bit.
It does.
A bit of a
spray.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was maybe a bit naff, but I don't know. It has got its.
Well, it speaks for itself. The case is here to speak for itself, because we have to apologize. We saw it just
so much.
another way to go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we've got to 6 o'clock, so I think we can probably draw this to a close.
So much.
So lovely chatting over around that.
I forgot to turn that on for a little while. So hopefully the video
Thank you, Ravisa.
Yeah, thank you for coming.